Alright, so flashback to 2019, the year before 2020 and the year after 2018, in case you were wondering. There was a lot of chatter, a lot of talk in these streets about WNBA players who were raising their voices regarding their lack of compensation. There were a few arguments going around at the time, some of them very much justified and some of them maybe a little unreasonable. But for a lot of the league, they were asking for something that I think is relatively reasonable, increasing the percentage of the league's revenue, which is shared with the players, from 20% to a number closer to their counterparts in the NBA, who earn an even 50% of the revenue generated by the league. Now, before y'all turn on me, this is not a video arguing whether their demands are justified or not. You can take those comments elsewhere. I understand that the W isn't profitable, and increasing the percentage of revenue shared with the players would just be digging a bigger hole. And therefore, we can't make an apples-to-apples comparison with the NBA, which is a significantly more profitable league. I do think there's some unrealized value in the WNBA, more than just money in, money out, that doesn't get factored in when looking at a balance sheet, but yes, I got it. Totally understand. What I do want to look at in this video, though, is that the promising trends of the past year suggest that if they were to continue, the league may be closer to a reality where they could become profitable and, as a result, increase player compensation. So let's chat through this. Let's look at the state of the WNBA, how it's performing in comparison to other leagues, and what the W can continue to do to grow and eventually get to a point of profitability. Alright, so I was doing some research for this channel and I stumbled across an article on The Athletic which talked about just how insane the WNBA's ratings have been this season. And according to that article, this year ESPN announced the WNBA regular season averaged 306,000 viewers per game, which is up 49% compared to 2020 and 24% to 2019. Now, to put it into perspective, the NBA's viewership on ESPN averaged at about 1.19 million viewers last season. And in 2020, the MLB averaged about the same at 1.19 million as well. So to put it in perspective, the W average is about 40% of the viewership of the MLB and the NBA, which to me at least is pretty impressive. I mean, that's a lot of people watching the WNBA. It's effectively for every 10 people who watch the NBA, 4 of them also watch the WNBA. That's pretty dope. It's not impressive to me because of the fact that women are getting 40% of the viewership of men. I think there are enough examples like tennis to suggest that the difference in athlete gender has nothing to do with viewership numbers. I actually think it's impressive that a league that's only 25 years old is growing at the speed that it is. It has close to 40% of the viewership of more established leagues like the MLB and the NBA, which have been around for close to a century. In fact, it's for that very reason I think the WNBA is going to thrive, and that in our lifetime we may see it grow to a point where it will become a formidable league, generating consistent profits and potentially be on par not just in viewership but in terms of revenue as the MLB and the NBA. Will that actually happen? I don't know, but I'm an optimist. Now, all that being said, as it stands, I don't think we should be comparing the WNBA to the MLB or the NBA or any of the other major leagues in the US. At least not yet. Though I do think there's another league we could point to that would be more effective to compare it to, and that would be the MLS. And there's a couple of reasons why. Both the MLS and the WNBA started around the same time. The MLS in 1993 and the WNBA 4 years later in 1997. Both play similar schedules around the same time of year and have similar business models. Both play nearly the same amount of regular season games, and both start and end when other leagues they'd normally be compared to are not competing, focusing more on being a complement to those leagues than a competitor. There are also some clear-cut differences as well. MLS attendance numbers are much higher, and the valuation for those teams are some of the highest across the world in any major sport. The average MLS team is valued at $550 million. The average WNBA team is valued between $17 and $35 million, or between 3 to 6% of the average MLS team, depending on how you calculate it. But as we discussed in this video we did on the MLS, there is a big difference between how much a team is valued at and the actual financial health of a team. Franchises like LAFC and the Seattle Sounders being valued at close to $1 billion sounds impressive, but valuations are extremely arbitrary, compounded by the fact that the majority of teams in the league do not make a profit. Of the 23 teams that played in the MLS during the 2019 season, the last normal year on the books, only 7 turned any profit, the highest being Atlanta United at just $7 million. In total, the average profit for an MLS team is negative $4 million a year. The WNBA, in contrast, loses roughly $10 million a season across all teams, or just over $800,000 a year per team. Of course, the revenues are much greater in the MLS. We're talking about a league that rakes in about 15 times the money the WNBA does. Now, that being said, one thing to consider is that while they have significantly more revenues, most of this is generated by the exorbitant expansion fees owners are paying to join the league. The league plans to stop expanding in 2023, which will be the first time in over a decade there won't be hundreds of millions of dollars flowing in from these expansion fees. So the loss of $4 million per team that we just saw could look a lot worse in a few years, unless they manage to come up big in their next TV deal. So as crazy as it sounds, there is a scenario, a very real scenario, where the WNBA could actually be the more financially viable league out of the two, which is kind of wild to think about. The MLS is also the only reasonable option for soccer fans in the States, and is more so a reflection of the industry as a whole in the US, whereas the WNBA has to compete with college men's and women's basketball, the G League, as well as the NBA. Not to say that there aren't other soccer leagues in the US, but their impact financially isn't on par with any of the 4 basketball organizations we just mentioned. To put it simply, if I'm going to a soccer game in the US, 100 times out of 100, it's an MLS game. If I'm going to a basketball game in the US, it could be for any of the organizations I mentioned. So alright, what was the point of all this? I think the goal here is to stress that the WNBA is in a better state than we maybe give it credit. In just 25 years, they've managed to rake in a substantial number of viewers for each game, have minimal losses financially, and done this all while building a brand that has some of the most recognizable athletes across all sports. I'd argue there are many, if not more recognizable WNBA players than there are MLS, MLB, or NHL players, at least within the United States. And as the next media rights deal rolls around, the increase in viewership suggests that there will be more money flowing in, meaning potentially more money for players. And who knows, there may be a day soon that they get their demands met, and that there's enough money on the table where they can receive 50% of the league's revenue, or even become a league that reaches the status of the other 4 big leagues in the US. I'm not saying it'll happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does. Alright y'all, thank y'all so much for making it through another video. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're just starting out here, so any support that we can get is greatly appreciated. And I appreciate y'all for real. Thank you so much for all the support, all the love, and all the positivity. Have a great rest of your day. Love y'all. Peace. I kinda met Sue Bird one time. we were we're both at the airport, and I forgot where I was going. I think I was going to LA. We were both flying out of Seattle because she lives in Seattle because she was for the greatest WNBA franchise of all time. Shouts out to the Storm. Yeah, and I was going through security, and then in comes Sue Bird, and walks just straight through security, TSA pre-check line, because that's how we do. And she's carrying no luggage. Just the most baller thing I've seen on planet Earth. I gave her like a little head nod, like it was good, because she was wearing a mask, so I don't think anybody thought that they would recognize her, but I knew her because I'm a hooper, and a hooper knows a hooper. So I gave her like one of these, you know what I'm saying? I didn't want to act like a fanboy, but I also needed to acknowledge her, and I needed her to acknowledge the fact that I was acknowledging her. So I hit her with one of these. I was like, yo, what's good? And yeah, she just walked right past me.